contributions and reflections on. So, Jamie, would you please take attendance?
Sure. And I also just need to get this meeting recorded. So
Okay.
Here we go. All right. So we do have to do roll call since we are remote. So Randy.
Here.
Rita.
Here.
Pete.
Sorry, here.
Thank you. Jess.
Here.
Richard.
Here.
All right. Great. Thank
And
you.
we also welcome Kathleen, who's going to be, who's in process of being hopefully appointed by the council to be a member of the commission. Thank you. And thanks to staff Todd and Jamie and Councilor Shoup for joining us. So just a brief land acknowledgement that we're on unceded territory of the Wabanaki. This is their homeland, and we are honored to and hopefully do well by stewarding the land that we have and the precious resources before us in Scarborough. So the next order of business is to vote on the meeting of our last meeting. And did anyone have any updates or changes?
Just a couple of really minor things. On the second page under number 3, promoting engaged citizen stewardship. It says that Jessica will provide, has offered to prove, and it should be provide.
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, Jessica will provide Maine-based data. Just those 2 minor things.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to accept the minutes?
Motion made. To accept
And
the
a
minutes.
Second.
Seconded.
Thanks, Jamie.
Sure. All right. Roll call. Randy.
Yes.
Dick.
Yes.
Pete.
Yes.
Jessica.
Yes.
Rita.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. And so today is a chance for us to, I'm going to put up front the preparation for the town council workshop next month on the 19th. And earlier I circulated to this group a Google Doc that had a framework, and I can, I'm hoping that everyone received that. If you have a thumbs up that you received that and were able to open it, okay, we can discuss that. Dick, did you receive this framework of the planning committee? I mean, the planning for the workshop?
Yes.
Welcome, Maggie. We're just going through the agenda review. And we'll talk about that, and then I'll do as much time on that before Karen needs to leave, and then she has an update about the planning board. Then we'll shift to the report from the conservation subcommittee. Great work that's been done by our soon-to-be appointed member, Kathleen, on the plant species list, and an update from the Building Resiliency Committee, and a lot of great work from the Education Subcommittee. We'll have an update on that. And not a lot of new business. I mean, none on this agenda because we're focusing on next month's workshop, but we'll have some additional updates. Is there anything, and I also, there was a note here for public comment. You know, I like to include everybody and welcome any voices into this, into our meeting. But for the purposes of this meeting, I wanted to have a section for public comment so we can focus as a committee on the planning for the workshop. Looks like that is not going to be something that we need to really concern ourselves about tonight.
Well, we do have 2 attendees joining.
Oh.
So Andrew Mackey from Scarborough Land Trust and Marvin Gates of Prouts Neck are viewing with us. So while they're not on the screen, they are in the meeting with us. So
Okay.
Andrew and Marvin, if you have anything to contribute at this point, just raise your hand, and
I didn't see them. Okay, thanks.
that's okay. All right. So I'm going to allow Marvin to, oh, nope. Okay, Marvin, I'll allow Marvin to talk first.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes.
we can.
Hi, Marvin Gates, Prouts Neck Conservancy, 499 Black Point Road. You have a lot of business. I won't take much of any of your time. The Prouts Neck Conservancy is focused almost entirely on the management and control of invasive plants on the Prouts Neck Peninsula. And we've gotten to the point of the introduction of native plants. So we're two-pronged in that way. Because tonight, herbicide bans are in the air in Cape Elizabeth and in Hallowell, I did want to, and I know that's a subject that will be broached in Scarborough, certainly has already to some degree. I wanted to just make a friendly reminder for those of us who are working very hard at managing invasive plants, the value of a surgical application approach of herbicide, and just offer that in the future, particularly summer 2024, the Conservancy will be hosting a conference during which the science from biologists, entomologists, ecologists, botanists, and arborists will be presented. So that's it. Just you have lots of other things to do, but just a little bee in the bonnet for future thought. Thank you very much.
A good bee to have, and thank you very much, Marvin. And I know there are others who are interested in this topic, both commissioners as well as people who are residents. So there's growing interest in collecting more information and taking some action. So we will, I'd like to definitely come back around to that with more organization at some point. So thank you, Marvin, for keeping us posted. Is that all public comment?
No, Andrew also has his hand raised.
Great.
So Andrew, you're welcome to unmute.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hi, Andrew.
Andrew.
I just want to share a couple of quick comments I shared with Karen earlier today. I thought I'd bring everyone up to speed. I wanted to let everyone know that currently the Scarborough Land Trust is working on 11 land protection projects in Scarborough. This totals about 303 acres, give or take a little bit. Doesn't mean they're all going to happen, but that's a lot of projects. We are continuing to work with landowners that we reach out to or that approach us. I think I've mentioned in the past that we have contacted basically every landowner that has 35 or more acres in the town, and at least made an offer to talk to them and continue to do that process. We are also planning to open two new trail systems in 2023 or early 2024. That, of course, would be open to the public. And so that's pretty exciting. We also just completed a 4th grade teacher workshop in anticipation of the 4th grades bringing all their kids out to Scarborough Land Trust properties this spring. So I just wanted to throw those things out, and I'm done.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrew. Dick?
Can you tell us where the new trails are going to be?
I
That was also
can.
Todd's question.
We have a new trail that is has been planned and is in the development stage out at Broadturn Farm. It'll use a new area of that property. And then we also have a new trail that already has started construction at what we currently call Science Park, which is, if anyone remembers the old Humpty Dumpty potato chip factory, that area right there near the river at Route 1. And so those are the two new trails planned for this year.
Thank you. All right, so if everyone is good, I'm looking at the town council workshop planning draft. And this is prompted by the town council's goals for 2023 to look at sustainability, conservation, and climate change to conserve more land in Scarborough and better integrate conservation sustainability principles into the planning process. And they have listed a number of priority actions and ideas about how we could partner to integrate into the town's planning process. And they're asking for a couple of 2 to 3 recommendations for resource needs and some quick wins that would enable us to really move forward on creating a more sustainable Scarborough. And so this is where I was, and several of us were thinking about framing a April 19th workshop. We're on the calendar for the town council that speaks directly to their goals. Before I go into that, I want to ask Karen if you have anything else to add on this piece to give us some guidance about what you think is going to be really successful. Like how would we know we've been successful in this workshop?
That's a great question. Currently they're calling this a conservation workshop sponsored by Councillor Shoup. I really think this should be the Conservation Commission workshop. That's what I'm calling it. That's what I'm considering it. The whole point is to put you guys front and foremost in front of the council and the town to really educate them on what you guys know. So, I feel I don't really have much to say because you guys are the experts in these fields. You're the ones who are going to be able to identify what we need to hear. I thought, one of the emails I saw was saying, we should probably do a quick background on the 30 by 30, which would probably be great. Because the reality is, even in our workshop, we didn't get much into it. I think people kind of had an idea of what it was, but I think generally, maybe just a quick education of where it's coming from. Again, we didn't really talk much about it, and it would be good for the public. Randy sent me a rough outline. Again, I think you guys really know what information people need to hear to make this important to them. I think the only guidance I'm looking for from you guys, because again, I'm calling this a Conservation Commission workshop, is how we're going to put in the other committees. So we have the land and the Parks and Land Conservation Board. And then we have, I think, Scarborough Land Trust, which will kind of speak on behalf of the type of organizations that would assist us in reaching 30 by 30. I'm kind of looking to you guys again to see how they would fit into the presentation that you've kind of outlined. In my mind, personally, they're just one of the many people that support your goal, this goal, conservation altogether. But tell me I'm wrong, tell me I'm not wrong. I'm looking for you guys to kind of, figure out that timeline.
So thank you. I see this as a really wonderful and powerful, full of opportunity kickoff for us as a Conservation Commission in partnership with the Town Council, and that this workshop begins a really concerted effort in developing a greener, more sustainable Scarborough. And so it doesn't begin and end with this workshop, but after this workshop, where are we going to be taking this with a number of partners? So how we thought about doing this is really kind of being concise, clear, and straightforward in our message. There's a lot of ways that we can go into details and technical aspects, but we also want the town council and staff to have some really clear takeaways and understanding, as well as the members of the public who will be present or listening in later. So the thought is to organize this around 3 main points, which is, how do we develop a culture of conservation thinking among town leadership? And a lot of that is setting common understanding around key aspects, which is, what do we mean by green growth or infrastructure? what are the 5 conservation principles that we want to be organizing ourselves around? What are the economic benefits of conservation? What do we mean by the term open space? Because it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. But what do we mean by it? And how are we defining the 30 by 30 or 30% conserved land by 2030? And so the first piece would really be grounding everyone in a common mutual understanding of what it is we're looking at. And then the second piece is, okay, where are we currently in terms of understanding our priorities, what our current conserved lands are in Scarborough, how much percentage-wise of Scarborough's lands are conserved already, and what has been the history of funding for conservation in Scarborough. So, and that sort of history of funding for conservation in Scarborough is particularly something that I think the Parks and Conservation Land Board has expertise on and history and can speak to that especially. And then finally, now that we know where we stand with all this, what are our recommendations for closing the gap? And I think we should call for certainly an open space plan for Scarborough. We've had one in 1996 and it's long overdue. An updated open space plan, calling for an integration and prioritization of conservation principles in the town's planning process, and creating new ordinances, developing additional funding, and then collaborating with all of the actors, both residents like landowners, farm and forest landowners, as well as community partners like the Scarborough Land Trust and Maine Farmland Trust and others. And then really sort of ending with what are the quick wins that we can achieve potentially cost effectively. So here are some ideas. And Jamie, if you could just scroll just a little bit here. So 6 pieces here around how we can use town-owned property to convert them to conserved land, engage us in site plan review. We started that, but let's keep it going. Update and formalize the plant list for commercial design standards is a quick win. And bring the draft ordinances, having a joint meeting with Planning Board, Sustainability Committee, Conservation Commission. Certainly attracting more visitors to Scarborough by really publicizing and shining a light on all of our natural resources and assets, beaches, parks, Scarborough Land Trust, the Eastern Trail, and other trail networks. And I am going to call on Jessica, and after Jessica, Pete.
Thanks, Randy. So I was just thinking about the role that the Parks and Land Conservation Board could have. And in addition to reviewing the history of funding with the land bonds, I think it could also be really helpful if there was a discussion of the accomplishments with those funds. Because I don't think that I don't think we can ever have enough celebration of those accomplishments and what funding for conservation can do.
Fantastic. And Pete?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I just had a quick thought. We should stay away from the term green infrastructure here because it has a different connotation. I put that in the document. I'm not sure why it didn't pop up, but green growth, whatever we want to call it, is fine. Green infrastructure is a very different concept in terms of what we're talking about here. And then how much time do we have overall for the workshop?
1.5 hours. And Karen, I'm assuming we need to leave time for council to have some discussion back and forth with us.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you want to plan for like an hour and then you'll go over an hour and then you'll have a little time for questions. And then that gives us a couple minutes before the normal council meeting at 7. But I mean, I think roughly around an hour, and then that gives you time within it for like discussions and questions.
Okay. That's good. And then I guess a follow-up question is we'll work on this, but how are we envisioning this? Is we going to have each different committee kind of presenting one portion of this, or how are you envisioning that?
Right. I mean, again, I'm calling this a Conservation Commission workshop. So I'm sort of planning on Randy or whoever it is that's going to be presenting mostly running it, and then saying, okay, now we're going to have, the land and the Parks and Land Board talk about this, and then we're going to have Scarborough Land Trust talk about this. That kind of ties into the general presentation that you guys are giving.
So I think, and in exemplifying how collaboration works, I think that it would be really great if we present this as one with these 3 main points, and different speakers come in on different pieces. So you see there under 2, the last bullet is around history of funding and accomplishments for Conservation Scarborough, would be when someone from Parks and Conservation Land Board, probably Suzanne, speaking to that point. So I would want key people to get together, obviously in the weeks prior to April 19th, and do a run through and determine sort of timing. We also have already talked about engaging Jessica on the economic benefits of conservation. That's her, that's her expertise, and so forth. So this not being, okay, now the Conservation Commission speaks and now the Parks and Conservation Land Board speaks, but instead we speak as one voice looking for green growth in Scarborough.
So just to follow up, it seems to me like about, if we wanted to shoot for maybe 20 minutes for each topic, would be appropriate then. That would get us to an hour.
Right.
Right? And then leave a solid half hour for discussion. I don't think we should be going over an hour. No, everybody tunes out after an hour.
Yep.
I feel like what the information you guys are going to be giving is going to take longer. And I think, I mean, you know better than I do. I feel like there's going to be a lot of educating about stuff generally. So I'm not sure how you feel about that. I'm not sure if they can fill 20 minutes with a history, and I don't, what was the other thing you said, that the Parks and Conservation Board?
Because I mean, I could spend 20 minutes talking about resiliency, but
oh yeah,
but
you don't want us to go to sleep. And and this is where I'm trying to be delicate, and I'm saying, like, we need to keep it moving along, and I don't want someone to spend 20 minutes on a certain thing where we're not talking about maybe looking forward or how to really get there.
Yeah, our challenge and opportunity is to have people walk away from this knowing, like, okay, I got these main points, and here's some quick wins that I, as a counselor or a resident, can really participate in. So it's going to be ours to really get to high points, concise information with the ability to go deeper on a lot of these through our education program that Rita and Marla work on, and other public meetings. And Todd has his hand up.
Thank you. I think 2 things that I just wanted to put out here quickly is that I think the format and stuff we're talking about is great. I know during our Parks and Conservation Land Board, we've been talking about different low-hanging fruit and definitions, and 2 things that I think would be incredibly helpful is creating a definitions list prior to, even having this conversation with Parks and Conservation Land Board or any other groups. That way, everybody's speaking the same language, and if there's something that we can then create and share out to council and anybody else ahead of time, so they're not trying to learn a definition and understand things along the way. Like, they can really try to truly get a better understanding of when you say, green infrastructure or resiliency, they already know kind of a little bit about what, the couple key sentences are, not the whole definition, but, just a couple things, and how, so that way they can really just tune into what you're saying and not try to process the information, because they will drown with all the information. It's just too much. So anything we can spoon feed and process. But I guess my key point is to make sure that Land Trust, Land Trust, your board, Park and Conservation Land Board, even my advisory board, because we're going to start going through the parks and master plan and start looking at things. So if there's threads we can link together and all be on the same page, can be using the same language, I know I would appreciate it as my link between a couple different places. So just my
Great.
2 cents.
Great point. All right, so we're gonna develop a definitions list. Thank you, and that would make that opening piece a little bit more concise. And Jessica?
Sorry, I was gonna say, I think that's a really great point, and wanted to get Karen's thoughts on materials. So for example, when I talked to the education subcommittee, we were discussing a handout, a leave behind on the economic benefits of land conservation. And so if we can prep materials in advance, I think in addition to the definitions list, I would advocate for an economic benefits handout. And then even as basic as what each group does and how we relate to one another. I think that there is sometimes confusion about what the Parks and Land Conservation Board does and what the Conservation Commission does, even, community services. And I think it could be very helpful to understand what's under the charge of each group and how we interact. I don't know how folks feel about that.
I can say that in the past, most of the workshops that we have, all of the slides are uploaded with our agenda and stuff. So, I think anything that you want to include prior, they would love it. I think it's better. Give them as much as you can. Some people will dive into every ounce of it. Some people will take a glance at it and just come to the workshop. And so I think whatever information that you're going to be presenting, ultimately, we want it available to the public. So if you have a slideshow, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I typically think it's all accessible. It's all put up there before the meeting even happens, which would be even better because then, everyone's going to see the definitions, even the residents that are tuning in.
Great. Rita?
Yeah, just to say that if we are going to not have specific time slots for the 3 different groups, we're going to try to put it all under one umbrella. We certainly want to get, Andrew from the Land Trust involved and the Parks and Land Conservation Board involved so that they know what part they can and should play in the conversation.
Absolutely. So Jessica is a member of the Parks and Conservation Land Board, and so is Noah. And they're aware of this, and there's a meeting tomorrow, we think, if it's not called off.
It just got canceled.
Okay, so they're going to be talking about it.
But we're going to reschedule.
Okay, and can speak to that. And then, obviously, under the recommendations, so Andrew, as I understand, and we can connect with him after this, is not able to be there on that day, or whether he is or not, or a staff member of Scarborough Land Trust. That's a piece that is right there. It's how we can collaborate strategically with residents and community partners. Do we bring in all of them or a few? Okay, Karen, before you leave, you said you had something to say about planning board.
All right, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I was actually just typing it out. Yeah, I got to go. There is an opening on planning board, and I think we had a very successful appointment of Noah. So I want to put that out there. And if you guys know of anyone that you think might be good to apply, we've opened it back up from our applications for the next month. So I would love for someone in this group to have someone with the like mind to apply to planning board.
Thanks, Karen. Have a good evening.
Yes, thank you guys.
And we'll be in touch, of course, before the 19th. So there's a lot of pieces that are going to be taken from this workshop and integrated into the calls for action that we have as part of our recommendations for closing the gap of where we want to be and where we are currently. Pete?
Yes, and such a focus is going to be on 30 by 30. I don't know if did we ever come to a conclusion in our discussions with Andrew? Andrew, please jump in, about whether or not we're including the marsh. And I don't think we should be including the marsh in that number.
So Jessica,
details at this point.
So Jessica, can you chime in here because we talked about that? Mm-hmm.
Well, and I'm also going to ask for a backup from Jamie and probably Todd. So it is not as
Good.
simple a question, and town staff is currently working on that very question. And I want to point to the wonderful maps that Jamie shared earlier today. And so I have, and obviously have the rest of the subcommittee jump in. We, as a Conserving Land Subcommittee, had a presentation from Micah last week. And I think what we can commit to is it'll be an apples to apples comparison when determining the percentages. However, the parcel map is the parcel map, and we're not going to be creating a new definition of lands specifically for this effort. Jamie, am I saying that right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it would be a really in-depth and intensive GIS process, I think, to really understand which parts of the marsh are submerged on a regular basis. I mean, we're basically pulling our data directly from our existing GIS database, and I don't think that we've got the bandwidth to go through that GIS exercise to figure out, what technically is land and what is water. And so either we include the marsh as part of that calculation, or we have to somehow remove the marsh area from the town's area in order for it to be, I think, an apples to apples comparison, as Jessica said.
Can I make a suggestion real quick? then?
Yeah.
I could very easily clip out the existing marsh based on what the highest tide is. The highest tide level is a proxy for marsh, or I have access to the main natural areas program layers, which define tidal marshes based on field studies and also aerial ortho imagery that they have. So I'm happy to do that exercise and hand it back as long as I can get that the actual GIS layer that you're using.
So
I'll
I
just
guess
throw that out there.
for that question, I would ask you to work with Micah, and maybe Pete, you, Jessica, and Micah directly have that conversation, since Micah is our GIS administrator and is the one that has, access to all of that information.
Okay, just let me know, because that's a very easy exercise to do. It takes all about 15 minutes.
And I also just want to make the point, just in terms of the marsh, that the marsh has been disturbed in the past. I mean, it's been channelized and drained. Parts of it have been drained for agricultural uses and things like that. And we're not doing that anymore. So in that sense, I think it is still worthwhile to count the marsh as conserved land, because we're not going in and disturbing it like we used to for agricultural purposes.
Yeah, I would argue against that, but that's my opinion, because it's already, quote, protected, and we shouldn't be using it as something, because you can't do something in wetlands anymore like that. So I don't want to get into back and forth about it right now, but we could have both statistics very easily. And I think we should have both statistics in our pocket, is I guess what I'm saying.
I
And
agree. I definitely
believe
agree.
that and I think the good thing is by the 19th or before the 19th, we'll have that prepared and we'll all know and can share that. I saw Maggie's hand up. I don't see it anymore, but
So I was going to ask Pete, because I agree that I don't think we should count it, but I was just going to ask Pete what his reasoning was for not including it.
Because I think it artificially inflates our statistics. I mean, it's owned by the majority of it is owned by the state.
Right.
And it's not something that Scarborough did to conserve land. So I just think it's a false sense of patting ourselves on the back.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
It's not to say it's not important. I think it's important for us to have the statistic that says, okay, if we don't include the marsh, here is our goal, and this should really be our goal, as opposed to saying we have 3,200 acres already protected. But it's kind of just, I think,
So
I feel inflating our numbers. So.
Can I ask a question related to that? If we're not going to include the marsh, then are we going to count the marsh as part of the town's land area?
I don't think we should.
Then if we are removing that out, our percentage is going to be, unless my math is wrong, our percentage is going to be the same.
Oh, yeah, it would. So, yeah,
So-
as long as we just remove it. then we're
Or
good.
if we leave, I mean, either it's all in or it's all out, and,
Math is the same though.
right.
So, before I get to Jessica, could, we need a small group of people who will agree to work together to, prepare for this workshop. And, Jamie, would you be willing to collect those expressions of interest and help us find a time to get together?
Yes.
Okay, so we need and welcome everyone on this commission. Some, but not all, would be great. And I mean, if it's all, that's good too. But please email Jamie and say, yeah, you want to help with some of these points, or you have other ideas, and collecting information or preparing slides, or doing the definitions list, or thinking about messaging, thinking about even a title so that it's compelling to the public. So we need all skills and minds. Please email Jamie, and then we'll figure out a time to meet probably a couple times before the workshop so we can make it as effective and as powerful as possible.
And can I just do just a note of housekeeping, that in order for everything to be to the town council in part of their agenda prior to the workshop on the 19th, we really should have all of our stuff probably to me, and then I will get it to where it needs to go by the 12th.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
So we can start yesterday. Jessica and then Pete.
So I just wanted to highlight that that's really under point 2, the assessment of the gap, where we are and where we need to be, and coming up with what I'm going to call a recommendation from the Conservation Commission. So we are recommending defining conserved lands as Scarborough as this, using this data, which comes out with these number of acres out of this total, which is this percentage. And I think we all know that's easier said than done, but I know that staff is working on it. So I look forward to continuing that conversation. And Jamie, how are we doing with timing with the full group if we need to submit, or would we be submitting those numbers on the 12th of April?
Yeah, I think that we should have some sort of agreement from this group. So our next meeting would be on April 10th.
Okay.
So hopefully, hopefully there can just kind of be placeholders, and it can be updated after the meeting on the 10th, once there's some agreement on the group with what the recommendation is based on the numbers that we're going to look at that meeting.
And I think you made a great point. When you count it in one column, you count on the other column, it doesn't change the percentage. So it's a one.
It's a net zero.
It's a net zero. Yes.
Pete, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, I don't want to jump off the topic of what we're covering right now. I had a question about the coastal ordinance, the coastal resiliency ordinance that's included in here, if we wanted to move on to that, but I don't want to jump to that yet.
Okay, how about, are you okay if we then call this discussion closed and move back to the order on your agenda, which is also including an update on coastal resiliency? And
Oh,
go ahead.
yeah, we could do that. Yeah, that's fine. I was just trying to get a sense of what we were wanting to fit into this discussion as it relates to coastal resilience, because my initial concept was to pull out of the model ordinance language that was developed by Southern Maine Planning and Development Commission, but only for this, only to focus on stuff that's related to achieving our conservation goal of 30 by 30, not necessarily all the other resiliency related stuff that I think is really important for us to pursue. So
Okay.
that's the question I had.
Okay. How about we talk about that in one of the planning meetings we have? I think there's an easy path to that. And again, it sort of underscores that this is not the end all be all of conservation talk in town. There's more to come. So I want to thank you all for this discussion. I'm excited about the workshop and glad that the town council is engaging us in really diving in with them and looking for some quick wins. So let's go back to our committees who each of you have done a really fantastic, substantial work since our last meeting. Starting with Conserving Land subcommittee, and I'll turn it over to you, Jessica.
So this is a bit of a continuation of the discussion we were just having. But as I mentioned, Jamie, do you mind sharing the map?
Nope.
That I think what's really interesting is, and these are rough maps, is that there was always the conserved lands map. And then as part of the open space master plan, there was a creation, I believe, of the town-owned lands map, which then broke the types of town-owned land into subcategories. And so there are certain subcategories of town-owned lands that we probably want to include in our conserved lands, such as open space, park, which are two of the categories. But there are other categories that we might want to think about whether or not it's appropriate for conserved lands, such as historic might have lands that we would consider open space, or cemeteries can sometimes have public access and amenities that are consistent with open space. But I think it's a big step forward that we do have these subcategories of town-owned lands, and now we have them all on one map. But it's part of that, what are we recommending as a definition for conserved lands in the town of Scarborough? And then we will have this map moving forward.
So if I can add a little bit to that.
Oh, please do.
So I've gotten, Micah provided me with the attribute table for this map. So I've been going through and looking at some of the parcels where we may have had questions, like this historic parcel. Does it make sense for that to be considered? And things like that. So I have kind of pulled some of the parcels out from the attribute table that we probably wouldn't consider as kind of open space or conserved, or land that's in a natural state. And those are like the schools, our fire stations. Most of the historic sites were actually associated with buildings. Some of them are very small, teeny tiny, like quarter-acre parcels with a monument on them. I've pulled those out. And things of that nature. So things that were not like, it doesn't make sense for them to be considered any kind of conservation land or anything like that. Which isn't to say, and Todd can chime in here, because a lot of it is land that's managed by his department, or parcels that are managed by his department. There may be opportunities for community gardens and things like that. And is that something that we do want to consider as we're talking through this process? Are there, parcels that look like they're not really, that they don't really necessarily fit what someone might consider as criteria for open space or conserved land or natural area, but there are other community benefits that we want to kind of highlight. And that's what I think, Todd's recommendation to have a definition associated with these things is really important, because, do we want to consider a park that is like primarily a baseball field as part of this process, or do we want to pull that out because really it's not serving any ecological benefit? There's lots of semantics that we need to kind of work through and agree on, so that we are, as Jessica said earlier, comparing apples to apples.
Yeah, if I could, and I agree wholeheartedly with Jamie, that's part of the definitions piece, because a lot of things that my advisory board is going to be going through and setting some priorities as a charge for council for some implementation guidelines for our master plan. And my personal thing has always been, we have a lot of great parks, but over the years, because of the youth athletic programs have grown so much that they've turned from neighborhood community parks to full-fledged athletic facilities. And so is that where we want to keep them? You know, I know it's not to get off the rails, but it's a huge maintenance task to drive all over town and to keep the level of service. You know, one of the things we've been batting around is to try to identify some parcels that we may be able to put athletic fields in one common area to better serve and less travel, and then repurpose some of the existing parks back into neighborhood parks with more community uses, because of the traffic and some of the pressures where you know, everybody talks about growth in Scarborough. I talk about where we've already grown and the pressures we've already created, and how do we best handle those with what we have before we go add more. And so that's kind of where my mind is around some of these parcels. So definitions would be great. That way we're all speaking the same language. And when we're looking at some of the parcels or parcels that pop up, and especially things that are in our master planning review, I'd like to just share with my advisory board and keep them on the same kind of plane with all the committees and boards. So
To that point, I'm going to start a shared document of definitions just so we can start adding to it. Let's keep that as a conversation document for now until we agree as a commission. Pete?
I would advocate for maybe getting some information from Andrew, how the land trust defines conserved lands. I think that might be important. And also I would advocate for conserved lands to be those lands that are not developable. In other words, they are conserved, they have an easement on them, and they will never be developed. I don't think open space should be included in this in our calculation, because if we're shooting 30 by 30 is 30% conserved. So in the definition of conservation, to me, that means it's not going to be developed in any way. So that might be a strict way of doing it, and I'm open to other interpretations, but we can certainly include open space on there. I think open space is very important as it relates to, mitigating for flood hazard, et cetera, but that's not conservation per se, at least in my mind. So my 2 cents.
Thanks. Jessica, and then Dick, and then Todd.
No, I think that it's a conversation we need to have, and we need to have it rather quickly about, what's in, what's out. So for example, the conserved land maps includes homeowners association lands that are deed restricted, but don't have public access. They're available to the residents of those specific communities, but they are deed restricted. And my understanding is that privately held conservation easements are being included going forward, but it's going to be a process of getting those historic deed restricted privately held easements. Then we have state and federal, and then I believe we are current on the Scarborough Land Trust land. So while we will have something for April, I do think it's going to be an ongoing process. As Micah said, the minute we publish any of this, it's then historic and dated and not current. But we're trying, and we as a group have to come up with what we're considering conserved lands for the town of Scarborough, and that definition will be unique to Scarborough.
Thanks. Dick?
Yeah, I'd like to second everything Pete just said. I wouldn't dare to say it, so I'm glad somebody stepped forward and put it that way. They have a program in the state called Beginning with Habitat. My point is we begin with habitat and we end with habitat. So looking at Todd, I think there's a lot of land that you've worked on that is really great habitat land. You've got trails and things like this. And then there's parts of that are open playing fields that I consider biological wastelands. So on a single parcel, you might have to divide that up into two different kinds of uses.
Todd?
Thanks, Vic. That's exactly why I had put my hand up, and that goes back to the definition conversation is as we think about how we're using them or really how we want to be using them, we can also be considering to that point of, we might have a 20-acre parcel that only 3, 4, 5 acres could be considered a different use or a different category of that. And then we could probably earmark and delineate that piece along the way. Because one of the conversations we had in the Parks and Conservation Land Board was, taking it, kind of coming up with definitions, not making them so firm, because how much land is really still available to reach this 20 by 30, 30 by 30 goal, and is it achievable for land that's undeveloped still in Scarborough? So I still want to see kind of all the benchmark areas and try to not handcuff ourselves where, because our definition is so fine we can't reach it, even though it may take some tweaking of what that means or breaking parcels out. I'm curious to really how many acres we're still shooting for to get to that goal.
And Jessica's next, but I this is also something I just want to say. Part of what we're going to be recommending is that the town do planning toward an open space plan. And so there are a lot of questions that we may not be able to define so concisely between now and April 12th. And the open space planning project or process will help us get there. So I think really calling out those pieces that we want an open space plan to assist us with. Jessica?
I was just going to mention that Micah said that there is a new impervious surface layer and a new vegetative cover layer. So that information would also be available. I don't think we should promise it for April, but we the technology is really improving. So the geospatial technology is really improving. So there are additional amenities that we can add to this that will help determine what portion of these parcels should be considered conserved open space in the future. And I just used the term open space, which maybe I shouldn't have, but conserve lands.
One other thing that I want to add to this conversation, and I'm glad that Pete is back because I want him to hear it as well and get his input on it, is that our zoning is a factor in all of this as well. The town has a resource protection zone, and I can't remember if I shared. I think I shared kind of the criteria for that or requirements for that to the Conserving Land group, but it is available on the Conservation Commission's shared folder. But while I've been working on going through and pulling out, removing the parcels that are also conserved from our resource protection zone so that they're not being double counted. But essentially no development can happen in those areas also. And so there are criteria for, it's essentially shoreline zoning on steroids. So really shoring up and strengthening the shoreline zoning, state shoreline zoning and the local shoreline zoning ordinance, and identifying areas where development can't happen. So as long as our zoning, our resource protection zone stays in place, those are additional areas that will never be developed on as well.
Pete?
Jamie, can those RP areas be, so I have a different definition, but possibly of what developed means. Maybe that's what it is. So in those RP areas, can somebody plant lawn all the way to the edge of something?
They're not supposed to.
Okay. So in an RP, because to me, there's the resource protection area, then there are buffers. So there are buffers from a resource, which basically says thou shalt not do anything. And then in the overlay, there's a certain area, but in my understanding, at least anecdotally, that doesn't necessarily promote, it doesn't necessarily have a specific connotation of conservation. But maybe it does. Maybe I'm just misinterpreting it, because aren't our shoreland zone overlays 250 feet from the high tide line?
Yeah, and this goes beyond shoreland zoning.
Right. But within our RPs, we have tons of development though. Then if you think about it, because within 250 feet of the shoreline, we have development all over the place. So I don't know how we would balance that.
So per the definition of resource protection, you can basically do like recreational trails. You might be able to do a small like a shed or agricultural building. Sorry, my computer might explode. I just tried to open up the the file so that I could look at the criteria or what's allowed and not allowed in resource protection. But my computer's not happy with me right now. So it's just something to think about. Most of the area in resource protection is also the land around the mark associated with the marsh. It looks like there's maybe 800 acres in resource protection that is not already part of conserved land or state and federal lands.
Jessica, do you have other things to add on this conservation subcommittee?
I just wanted to quickly ask how, so the zoning review happened last week. I was wondering how that went, because there are two potential changes. So the zoning review, and then we're under preliminary FEMA flood map zone review, which could change things. And then the last thing I was going to mention is that we will have the opportunity to create a parcel prioritization map based on priority features, and it will not be a publicly facing map. So I think that that's a real opportunity and exciting. Again, nobody wants to see that their parcel is magenta, so it won't be, I'm picking magenta, so it won't be publicly facing. We won't cause a public panic, but we, as a conserving land subcommittee in cooperation with the open space master plan, have the opportunity to create that parcel prioritization map.
Pete,
in the future sometime.
I think Jessica brings up a really good point, and it won't be necessarily for this discussion, but there's also in FEMA's goals, you want to try to conserve open land within the floodplain. So that's another stat that we'll be able to pull out of this and actually get a sense of where we're going with that. And, you know, maybe, I don't know, there was talk at one point, and it certainly is something that Scarborough might be interested in, but there's a program called the Community Rating System, which is something that back in 2012, there was interest in the community, but it kind of faded over time. Basically, the community has to do certain things to become more resilient, or understand its resiliency and understand its vulnerability, by doing all these open space calculations within the floodplain, protected land, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, plus a whole bunch of other things to check off. And as a result, there's a decrease in flood insurance on properties because the community is understanding its vulnerability more, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe that's something we might want to think about at some point. And I'm not saying the commission would do it, but maybe it's a topic we might want to revisit at some point, and think about supporting at some point. Side effort.
Amongst many side efforts. Dick?
Actually, I think that's tremendously critical to the very basic point of everything we're doing, because I have a question in my mind that's never been resolved. Can you use floodplain zoning to restrict people what they do on their land? And it's going to have a tremendous impact on Scarborough. And I get the feeling that nobody's been able to do anything about it up to this point. But if FEMA suddenly starts putting real flood insurance rates to match what they really should be paying. And it's going to be built into a mortgage, and people won't be able to afford their mortgages on houses because they can't afford these inflated flood insurance rates. The home values are going to plummet. I think this is a central question to everything we're doing, and I don't even know it's such a big thing. I don't even know how to start addressing it.
I will say that it's an ordinance. Municipal floodplain ordinance is what we have, and it requires mostly elevation of structures that are in the floodplain. Structures can occur, but there's also restrictions on what can and can't occur in terms of redevelopment and also cumulative development and things like that. So I don't know our floodplain ordinance like the back of my hand though. So
Thank you both. Okay. We have 4 other big things to talk about because you all have been busy. Are we okay to move on for right now, this topic, into reviewing the updated plant species list, with huge thanks to Kathleen for a lot of work on this. And Kathleen, would you like to lead us through this?
Sure. I'll also say Jamie did a ton of work on this too, so it wasn't just me. And I wasn't totally sure when we were doing the list about the acceptable alternative species. So some of the things that I think, these are all native plants. Everything in this list is from a native plant list. And most of what I looked at were recommended plants for this region. I spent a lot of time looking, like for street trees, looking at trees that would not be needing too much water, things like that. Although I do see the river birch, which
And the swamp white oak seems like it would need a lot of water also.
Yeah. Yeah, so there are a few things that it's like, well, that's
So
maybe
maybe we
questionable.
remove those.
But these came from, I used a couple of different native plant lists in my research, and we eliminated all of the potentially invasive and non-native plants. So I don't know if we want to have a full just native plants. Jamie, I don't know what your goals were.
So personally, I think we want to emphasize the use of natives, which I think that this list does, because you can see how many more natives there are on there than the alternatives. But I think it's nice to have some of the alternatives available, because sometimes it's hard to get native plants in our nurseries around here and things like that. So as long as there are some options that are more popular or more easily accessible, that are also acceptable and not considered invasive, I think that kind of hits the mark for, from my perspective. Definitely others can weigh in as well, and ultimately it will be the town council that kind of approves this, because it will become part of our ordinance.
And Jamie, I should have done this at the beginning. Can you give us a quick reason why we're talking about this right now?
Sure. So I'm going to switch here to the other tab in the spreadsheet. So this is these are the plants that are currently in our ordinance and in our commercial design standards. I think I misspoke at our last meeting when I said that only the list in the commercial design standards included invasive species. When I dug into this and looked more closely, they definitely are on this on the list in our ordinance as well. And these the plants specifically were the Amur maple and the Bradford pear, and those were called out by NOAA in a planning board review back in January. So went through and looked. So the two that are in bold red are on the invasive do not sell list. I will note that the maple was added in 2018. The pear is scheduled to be added in 2024. So technically they're not on the do not sell list yet, or pear is not on the do not sell list yet, but it will be added. And then also Rugosa rose was on this list. It's considered invasive in Maine, and tree lilac is one that I wasn't familiar with, but Kathleen called it out as being invasive. So we took this list and worked on revising it into hopefully a more usable form. So including the different categories of street trees, ornamental trees, evergreens, flowering and ornamental shrubs, ground covers, perennials, ferns, and grasses. And Kathleen had the great idea to add some acceptable alternative species on the list as well. And so went through, and I want to say Kathleen, I think did the bulk of this work. I added a few here and there, and really appreciate the time that she has invested on updating this list.
I just want to say too, thank you, Jamie. And I just want to say that the things that I listed under alternative species probably should be moved to the native species column, and we might want to then look at the other plant list and move some of those that are acceptable, because there are some on there that are not problematic. And many on there that are not native but are not problematic. And so I can work on that a little bit more.
Great.
So this is a real excellent example of the service that the Conservation Commission can provide to the town, particularly the planning board, as it's looking against commercial design standards, that they can turn to us for a gut check and a corrected, updated list. So thank you for your good work on this. And Pete has a question.
Yeah, just something quick. First of all, great. This is awesome. I love it. It's much easier to read also than the original Excel list. One thought, does it make sense to put the common name first and the scientific name second? When I'm not so learned in the scientific name, so I'm having trouble finding some of the species that I'm kind of interested in. I don't know if there's a specific format that this is typically done, but as a layperson, to me, it would be easier to have common name first and then scientific name as the second one. Just a thought.
I want to ask our planning staff about that, because it is usually like landscape architects that are putting these plant lists together and referencing, and they are probably more familiar with the scientific names.
And Jamie, can you walk us through the process of kind of what's next in terms of putting this into practice in the town?
Yeah, so this will have to, because it is an ordinance update, I think it will be Autumn who kind of shepherds this through the process, since she was the one that did ask the commission to be working on this. So it will be incorporated into our site plan review ordinance. That will then have to go through the ordinance committee to get their approval. And it will then go through the process of review by the town council. They'll refer it to planning board to get their input on it. It will go back to town council ultimately for a public hearing and for a vote. So it is a multi-step process, and it does take a little bit of time. But this is one of the quick wins that that can be considered, because this does definitely relate to our natural areas, and reducing invasives in our landscape is really important. So I think that this will have support of the council.
Todd? Thanks, Jamie.
Again, not to belittle Pete's point, but as a person looking through things, I would agree that the column swap. I do understand Jamie's point. I guess my thought would be is because again, we share a lot of resources online. If once this gets formalized in any format that it needs to be, we do another version for the homeowner versus, you know what I mean? And maybe that's just a simple flip, just easier to go through and look for, okay, there is river birch versus trying to dive through both sides. But again, just an easy way for the layman or the homeowner to look at in the future once we get it formalized in either way. But and also just want to say, this is awesome. Thanks, guys.
Kathleen?
Just to that point, I think, knowing that there are a lot of plants that share the same common name and that aren't necessarily the same species, that's something, because I think there are a lot of hybrid species, which, that might be fine, but I just, that's part of what the importance of the scientific name anyway. I don't think it matters which column is which, but I think maybe, if we do something for the homeowner or something, we would have a little bit of narrative that would be attached or something that would help clarify.
Honestly, I could see us taking this and putting it in a more aesthetically pleasing format for homeowners and things like that as well.
And we have a process that we're gonna move this through. But there isn't anything stopping anyone from referring to this list in the meantime and wanting to do the right thing and planting from this list. I will just say. Do we want to wait for the changes and updates Kathleen's going to make to this before we give it a thumbs up from the commission? What do you think, Kathleen? Don't know. What do you all think? We can vote to approve with the addition of having Kathleen make the changes that she mentioned, or we could wait till April to vote to approve. What do you all think?
We can wait till April.
Okay.
Just so you're comfortable with the list. And I would say I'll request that prior to the April meeting, if everybody can just give it a review before you come to the meeting in April. That way, if there are any questions, they'll be ready, so that hopefully the review and approval process will be quick at that meeting.
Thank you. Thanks a bunch, Kathleen.
Yeah, she's not even an official member of the commission yet, and she's invested all this time. So
Beautiful.
Thank you again so much.
The talent on this commission is phenomenal. Okay, speaking of talent, Pete, lead us through coastal resiliency model ordinance work.
Sure. So I don't have too much to add except from the last time, except the list that was created. I kind of went through and highlighted which ones, so people know what I'm talking about, right? The list. I'll just throw it in the chat just so people know. It's a really long address there. I think originally one of my concepts was that we pursue a coastal overlay zone where we actually create new zones and kind of work that way. And after going through the document that SMPDC came up with, I think it makes sense that we first try to address resilience through the existing mechanisms that we already have in place before we go and try to create new ones. I think we're going to have some recommendations for some additional resilience ordinance language that the town could potentially undertake, tying, in my mind, resilience with pesticide use and things like that get at the original ordinance overlays that we were talking about. But I think the way to pursue some of these resilience concepts is through our existing mechanisms. Makes it a lot easier to change some language within an existing ordinance, as opposed to going and trying to recreate or create a brand new one that then takes in a variety of other ordinances and fits them underneath that umbrella. So I'll have a list. I'll come up with the actual list of the ordinances that I think are important from that municipal document that SMPDC created, and have that list, prior. I'm hoping to do it this week, actually, get that list created, and hoping to do it so that we'll have it available for discussion, and whether or not those are the lists that go into a one-pager, for instance, that goes into the packet in support of our workshop on the 19th. Or is that too much information for the council, because we're not really going after a lot of those resilience ordinance language updates as part of this effort? I was going to highlight which ones relate more to open space / land conservation, and have only those in the list, or the list could be all of them. And the ones that are resilience could have like a little symbol for an R next to them or something like that. SMPDC even used these little symbols for, what the ordinance kind of related to. And I thought that would be a good way of kind of just distilling it down into a one-pager, as opposed to the multiple-page document that's there for the town council workshop.
Thank you. My thought is, if we say, SMPDC has looked at this, has drafted model ordinance language. We have positive thoughts about a number of it. We see some opportunities to adjust them slightly based on Scarborough's current ordinances and the ordinances that we want to strengthen or add. And we would like to then work with the Long Range Planning Committee to put these ordinances through, is kind of how I think it would be good to approach it at the workshop and generally.
Yeah, and I think it's important for myself to and Jamie and maybe some folks from planning to kind of have that list looked at by planning.
Yeah.
Before we say, here's the list that we want the town council to consider. Because there might be some things in there that I'm missing that have something that planning doesn't want to touch for some reason or another, or conversely, there's something that planning is considering that isn't in the resilience list.
Great. So you'll look at this, do a summary, meet with planning.
Yeah, I'm planning on coming up with my list tomorrow. I actually have the day off now because it's snow day for the state. I finally have time to do something, and actually do work on that list tomorrow, and then share it literally tomorrow.
And the workshop really is around we're not going to be in a position where we're asking town council to give us a thumbs up on these ordinances. We're saying we found these model ordinances. We're reviewing them against our current ordinances, working with planning. And next, we're going to take it through this process and just show that that's action we're taking as part of the quick wins piece. And they'll see it again after it's gone through.
Right. Yeah. It's not a final thing. It's a very preliminary thing, but I like the idea of the symbols next to them.
Nice.
As to what they relate to. So that's it. Simple update.
Okay. Thank you for that. All right. So the education subcommittee has done a lot of work as well, really mapping out the year ahead. And Rita, would you lead us through that?
Sure. Just wanted to, point out that we're using these winter months to do some planning around a speaker series, around, continuing to think about articles and fact sheets and so forth that we want to put together and make available on our website, and also get out to the public in various venues. And some changes and updates to our Conservation Commission website, particularly adding some climate change resource section for everyone to refer to, and just trying to really put together sort of activities and events that we are aware of that are coming up in the spring and summer months, and how we can participate in those. And also Marla and I are working with the Sustainable Scarborough Day planning folks, and we will be participating in that right through spring, summer, fall, because it is actually planned for October 1. So
Phenomenal work. It's quite thorough and really setting a positive drumbeat for the message we want to advance. And I like the thoughts about keeping an active webpage with information for residents and others.
Mhm.
I think this will be really engaging, and I think it'd be great to have at least one slide for the workshop listing out some of those key dates
Okay.
of presentations that we're planning to deliver.
Okay.
And it could even be just tentative.
Mhm. We can do that.
Thoughts from folks on that? Do you need additional help? Are you looking for more, Rita, more thoughts or feedback from the commission?
Marla and I think are fairly good in getting help from Jamie and Pete and others on putting together our speaker series.
Great.
So that's great, but obviously always open to additional ideas, additional thoughts on articles and fact sheets that you think people would really appreciate and would be useful. So
Thank you.
Happy to have those ideas come our way.
Thank you. And this is, I was talking about having a slide at the workshop, but this is really critical to how we're partnering with community partners and residents on helping us achieve our conservation goals. So this is what you're doing is putting ways that people can engage and be involved in helping to steward the land. Todd.
Wanted to put it out there and offer, if there's ever live workshops day or evening that want to be hosted, we always have space at our new facility that we're leasing. And we have different workshops and different things going on all the time, especially during some of our programming hours, but please consider that space if you need it. So
you're
Nice.
talking about the hub?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Any further information about Sustainable Scarborough Day? Rita mentioned that it's coming up October 1st. I don't know if you or Jamie want to add anything more. You're on mute.
I can add a little bit more. So we had our second planning committee meeting last week, talked a lot about the various workshops that we want to offer. So as a reminder, the event will be some vendor displays and educational displays, and then also more in-depth but shorter workshops, 25 minutes or so. And so the topics that were identified were tax credits and incentives available through the Inflation Reduction Act, home energy upgrades that pay for themselves, sustainable agriculture, sustainable landscaping, native plants, weatherization, and biking in Scarborough. And then also there will be the opportunity for electric vehicle test drives. We've already gotten confirmation that those will be available. So still kind of working out the details, but we'll be reaching out to local organizations and businesses to participate starting in the coming month or so. It is October 1st, which is a Sunday, but it'll coincide with the farmers market. So we're thinking like that can be a good partnership there. And we are pursuing Wentworth School as the venue for that, and doing some overflow at the library specifically for the kind of meeting spot for the EV test drives because of the EV charger that they have there. And then the library may also highlight their use of no pesticide lawn care practices and native plant gardens that they have around the grounds. So there's lots of good ideas there. If anyone else is interested in joining the committee, we meet the second Thursday of the month on Zoom at noon. So just shoot me an email if you want to participate. And we'll be working on our marketing and outreach plan. Allison Carrier and I just met today to kind of start planning our outreach strategy and website and all of that stuff. So more information to come as we gear up.
Fantastic. Jamie, you want to run us through the updates if there's?
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot of updates from council. I think that Karen kind of gave a sense of what she is focused on in terms of us. There is a meeting, a workshop tomorrow or Wednesday, excuse me, with the town council talking about zoning and updates to the town zoning map. So if that's of interest, you can attend either in person or on Zoom. That's at 5:30 on Wednesday. We'll have more of a discussion at our April meeting about planning board, unless maybe we want to wait and see how things are going for planning for the workshop. If we need another work session, Randy, we can discuss when you want to have April or Autumn, excuse me, attend the meeting to talk about kind of how Conservation Commission is integrating into planning board reviews.
Okay.
Sustainability Committee is really focused on the Sustainable Scarborough Day. So that's kind of the update there. And sounds like Parks and Conservation Land Board will be meeting to be determined because of the storm tomorrow.
Yes, and so on the agenda for the to be rescheduled meeting will be discussion of the workshop in April. Also discussion of the Scarborough Land Trust has requested the disposition of 4 town properties. And so we'll be reviewing those requested parcels. Also on the agenda is, should the marsh be included in the map, which I think is a broader discussion where there are multiple groups that have an interest in the definition of conserved land. So there may be some additional coordination needed. It's not just the Conservation Commission defines conserved lands as this, but getting agreement across groups. Todd, do you have any additions to that?
Oh, that's great. The only thing that's an ongoing work is just continue reval and eval of the our evaluation tool, as we just make sure that as we look at it, we're using the most current maps, and if there's metrics that need to be adjusted based on new goals that are set, that we're ready to consider those and be a work in progress. So.
And I will say, in that vein, there has been a request by the Parks and Land Conservation Board to, beginning with Habitat, to provide a presentation on their mapping. And I know that there are members of this group who would also be interested in that presentation. And so try to keep that coordinated, because I think that will be helpful in that what is the most up-to-date data and how best to use it.
Yeah, that'd be good. Thank you. That's great.
Randy, can I just add 2 more things about Sustainability Committee that I just remembered?
Yeah.
One is that they are requesting or going to request that the council do a proclamation for Earth Day. So that will be coming up in early April, and hopefully to encourage the community to go out and do something in celebration of Earth Day. The other item that may be of interest to some members of this group is that at their April meeting, they're going to be having a presentation on advanced building materials and ways that that can increase energy efficiency of buildings in various kind of modern building techniques. The committee has been asked to provide some guidance on the updated commercial design standards document. And so they're educating themselves a bit by having a presentation done on advanced building materials. So if anyone's interested, I will include that date in our next agenda of list of upcoming dates. But typically they meet the third or the fourth Wednesday of the month at 8 a.m. And the presentation will be hybrid. So if you want to just join in on Zoom for that portion of the meeting, you're welcome to.
It's great. That's where green infrastructure comes into play, right, Pete? Yeah. And just another celebration of Noah Perlett, who was part of our commission and still is in spirit, for his nomination by the town and award, the EcoMaine Award, for the work that he's doing for the town of Scarborough through the planning board, the Parks and Land Conservation Board, and his former work with Conservation Commission. We congratulate him and are really glad to continue to work with him. So anything else for the good of the order? We got a lot done tonight. Thank you for everyone. Oh, Dick, yes.
Could I, this is really just the Conservation Land Subcommittee. Do we have a
Yep.
meeting date?
Can we stay on, Jamie, and discuss as a subcommittee scheduling our next? Oh, no, we can't.
No, yeah.
So our next meeting, okay. So our next meeting is, as a Conservation Commission, is April 10th. Do we
Yeah.
want to try to do the week before? Sorry, guys. We were planning on meeting in person, but then we went virtual. So
So we have been doing it the Wednesday before, so
yes,
that's fine with me. The 5th,
the 5th. The
That's
5th
great.
at 5:30.
yeah,
Okay, I'll send that out.
thank you.
Thank you all for indulging us.
Thanks for remembering, Jake.
Now we all know we can join if we want to.
Yes, you are all welcome.
Thank you all. I really appreciate you. We are adjourned.